What I'm going to focus on is one aspect of the person-centered approach to risk that was developed, I think around 2008, and you'll see a list of names there on the screen. And Max, who's here today, is here to pick his brain if ever you have questions about the original work that went into it. So I'll be pulling from the actual process and focusing on one question of the process. What I thought I'd do is walk through it, the entire risk approach, not risk approach, person-centered approach to risk, so that you've got the big picture, the airplane view, and then we'll narrow into the rooster and work on the one tool, or the one framework. So I just wanted to start with talking about risk as part of everyday life, whether they're small, tiny, risks that we take either in a decision we're not sure how people are going to react to those big, scary, life and death kinds of risks, right? So sometimes we can pull different pieces of the framework that will help us in the moment for those lighter decision-making situations, but sometimes you really need to go through the entire process to get to the right number of solutions to explore further. So what you have on your tables, or what was shared earlier, is an abbreviated version of what we're doing today, but there's a link at the bottom, or an email, website address that will bring you to the actual article that was developed and from which the course on person-centered risk was developed. So if you click on there, you'll get all the details of what I'm talking about today, and then some. Okay? So when we're talking about risk, of course, we're talking about the dignity of risk and making sure that everyone has that right to take risky decisions, make bad decisions. And what's really funny is that a few weeks ago I went skydiving, and I did not think of it beforehand. My friend posted on Facebook, I want to go skydiving this summer. That's probably in February. Anyone want to come? And I hit yes. And then I forgot about it, right? Put it outside. Yeah, I didn't want to think about it. And as the time came close, my husband said, I want to go with you. And then the three of us were going to do it, but her husband wouldn't. He's just not into that. The week before, because we had a bit of a drive to go, the week before, my husband kept on wanting to show me videos, so to prepare me for that risk that I was going to face. I didn't want to see it. I said, show me after. Show me after what it looks like. I don't want to see what's going to happen before it happens. I'll just experience it and then decide if I want to do it again. And it went well, and I actually wore white shorts to do it. Then we thought about, ooh, what if I really get scared? It went well, we stayed white. And I just had a blast, and I loved it. Yesterday I got an email from my friend who came with me and got us going with a link to a newspaper about a fellow a few days ago who died from the same spot where we went and did skydiving from. It wasn't that there was faulty, they're still investigating, but he didn't land where he was supposed to land. Thank God I didn't do solo. But we take risks, right? Did I research? She did. I trusted as she did the research and found the safest spot close to home. I trusted her. Was that the right thing to do or not? A lot of people I talk to, and I see in your faces, there's no way you would have done that, right? So going a little bit further, it's about, some of us spend a lot of time deciding. Some of us don't and have those experiences and then decide that we're going to do it differently in terms of our decision-making process later on. And we need to know, and that's what Leanne's talking about. We'll talk about decision-making approaches and how we all want our information, don't want our information, how we want to process and how we want to move forward. So again, Albert Einstein is taking that time is important, and this process will help you with that. The actual model for person-centered approach to risk looks at 4 different pieces. The first one is around purpose. So what are we trying to achieve? So why are we talking about this? Why are we exploring this? Is it because we're afraid for the person's safety? Is it because we're afraid about our liability? Is it because the government says we need to do this before we let the person not be supervised? Why is it? Why are we doing this? What is it we're trying to achieve? And how can we help a person, really? The main question is about how can we help a person have as much choice and control in their life as possible, and the least amount of intrusion or support. We don't want to over-support people. The next bit is around the people. So who needs to be there? Who needs to be part of the process? Sometimes we get into these great discussions and we try to figure out risk, but we don't have the right players at the table. So doing some thinking about that is important. Today we're going to do one bit that falls under the actual process. So once we get that exploration going and evaluating options. But it really is about thinking about who the person is, what matters to them, what's important to them, what's important for them, what's been tried in the past. So it's looking at the whole picture. And how are we going to record all this to make sure we've captured what we've learned and we don't start over at the beginning next time? And how can we put these actions into practice? The next one is around progress. Sometimes we're always in crisis with some people. Do you support organizations or teams that they always seem to be in crisis? Oftentimes it's because they haven't done the pre-work, they don't understand it fully. They go to one solution and then it doesn't work, so they're in crisis again. They don't go back and evaluate, or even if it goes well, then they figure it's all resolved and they don't check in to make sure that it doesn't fall back. So that progress piece, that evaluative piece is really important. You've got this in your handout. It's a bit of a squiggle of how the process works, and then the list. So if you see on my screen, not your handout is in black and white, but on that screen, there's a question that's in blue. So how do the potential solutions measure up to what's important to the person or what matters to the person? That's what we're going to talk about with the framework I'm presenting today. In order to get there, you need to understand who the person is, and the best way to do that is a one-page profile to start with, or an essential lifestyle plan if you have that, or whatever information you have about what matters to the person. I added this slide after I sent it off to Alan for printing, so you don't have this in your little handout. Leanne's going to share the story of Eugene, and you did get that on your table, and we're going to use Eugene's situation to work through the framework I'm going to present in a second. So you do have Eugene's one-page profile on your table as well for when we do the work in a minute.
I'm not going to read this to you. I'm just going to kind of summarize a couple of things. The one thing I would tell you is that Eugene's probably, next to my friend Edward, Eugene's probably taught me more, with all due respect, Mr. Small, who I've known for going on 30 years here, taught me more about being person-centered than probably anybody ever has. Eugene just gets it, and he thinks about his life no differently than the rest of us think about our lives, and yet he's in this system of supports and services that thinks about it very differently. And he frequently says things like, "You wouldn't have to do that, why do I have to do it?" And we never have a good answer for that question, right? So the gist of the story is, we'd only known Eugene for a few weeks. He'd moved out of a large state hospital, and we'd only known him for a few weeks, and he pronounced very confidently one day, "I'm going to ride my bike to my mom's house, and you guys can't go with me." And this may not make sense to our non-United States folks. In most states where people are receiving services and have an individual services plan or an individual rehabilitation plan, IHP, ISP, whatever it's called, teams have to approve unsupervised time. So what Eugene's plan of support did not have at that point in time was approved, or Eugene himself didn't have approval from his team to spend time without staff. He certainly wanted it, and the team was working toward it, but it wasn't built into his plan yet. So he pronounces, "I'm going to ride my bike to my mom's house," and I think for a little while the world stopped. You know, we just sort of all sat there going, "The heck do we do with this?" And I'm going to sort of stop there because there's a few more details in the scenario, but that's part of the gist of this.
Thank you. So part of what we want to look at in the actual process, if you're doing a more, you've got more time to explore and you're building the understanding over time, is looking not just at the one-page profile or important 2, important 4, it's also looking at what worked and didn't work in the if you have that information around that situation. It might also be about looking at what do we know in terms of mapping out the history. What have we tried in the past? What worked? What didn't work? We also want to look at what's the problem we want to solve right now. So right now we want to figure out, what do? He wants to go by himself, and we don't have the authority or the right, according to the rules, to let that happen. And is he safe? Is he not safe? So all those questions are swimming. In the larger process, it's also looking at what does success look like for Eugene? What does success look like for his family? What does success look like for the organization, which might be stay out of the newspapers, because he got hit on his way there. It might be, what does success look like for the community? So we've been in situations where it was the hospital. We need to take that into context. What's the impact on them? Looking at, like I said, the history is important. The history mapping, and I'm moving forward very quickly. All that is in that article I talked about. We also want to look at what's the general impact if we do nothing. So what's the impact on Eugene? What's the impact on family? What's the impact on the organization if we don't support him in taking that risk? If we just say, no, you can't do it because the rules say, and we don't support him in being able to take that risk, what's the impact? So we would ask those questions for each stakeholder. The last question is, what does the law say? Right? So right now there's a rule, but is that the law? So every situation would have their own laws that you might be bringing into question. It might be around privacy, it might be around decision making, so you need to know those details. Now what happens is that fun part that we're talking about. So what are the options? So what do we do if we don't have the luxury today, but if we've looked at all that information, what are some of the options? I bet you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, we could shadow him, we could do this, we could do that. So the next part, once you have all of the information, would be to do some blue skying or some brainstorming to find out what are some of the obvious solutions or options in terms of supporting Eugene with this, and then doing some of that blue skying to find out what are those creative ideas. I'm going to give you guys, at your tables, 5 minutes to do a really quick blue skying around, in that situation, what would you do? Or what are some of the options in terms of supporting Eugene with this? His desire to just go without staff, to go and ride his bike across 6 lanes of highway, 2 major intersections, half-hour drive of biking to get there by himself, which he's never done, and isn't technically supposed to do it according to rules. And that he wants to do that this afternoon. So what are some of the creative ideas you can come up with in terms of dealing with the situation? Oh, we need to, Mike, sorry. Oh, right at that. Where's the timekeeper? How much time is left? Thank you.
I just had a question on Eugene's story. When it says mom lives 30 minutes away, is the 30 minutes by bike?
Yes.
Or is it, okay.
By bike.
Okay.
30 minutes by drive.
Any other questions about the story? And I know it's kind of an artificial way to do this because we're strapped for time. Any other questions about Eugene's story or what I'm asking you to do? So step 1 is to do the blue sky, then I'll introduce what to do with your ideas. Okay? So 5 minutes of blue sky at your table. So I hate to stop the creative flow. So when you get to this spot in your planning process, how do you decide which option is the best option? How do you guys do that usually? Eddie, do you mind running if anybody has a... I'll just get 2 or 3 people to share.
Well, there's a whole bunch of ideas generated by what's possible. But just the rules, or what's accessible to us.
Yeah, so looking at what's possible. Anyone else? How do you go to the next step of deciding what to do next? Which option to take?
Here we said consensus, but
sometimes it's a group decision or consensus. But then sometimes the rules get in the way. One more?
One of the ideas we have is really looking at, after we think lots of options, looking at what measures up to what's important to him, what's important for him, what are some creative ideas that can really honor that, and what is our role in his life. Making sure we're really clear on that.
Did you look at the next step in the handout? Is that what you did, Dina? I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. It's all those things, right? So sometimes we jump the gun and we just, figure out, okay, what do we need to decide now? But it's also looking at, we do that, I think, automatically, what's important to or what's important for, but then there's the rules part. So we are torn in all kinds of different directions, aren't we? So part of what we want to do is look at, so how do these options measure up in terms of what's important to the person? So is it a match? Does it even fit? Does it measure up in terms of what's important for the person? Or are we going overboard? Or maybe not enough support? What does success look like? We should go back to how we define success at the beginning. So for Eugene, it's that independence and deciding for himself and people not telling him what to do, right? So those options, we want to keep those things in mind. We want to look at how does it measure up to what's already working so that we don't undo that and we don't interfere with that. And then how does it measure up in terms of addressing what's not working? So this is the framework, and you do have it in front of you, and you have it as a handout as well. This is the framework that can help you evaluate each one of those options you came up with in your blue sky. So what you want to do at the top is look at if the option is really, really in line with what matters most to Eugene, then it would be at the top of the grid. If it really is against what is important to Eugene, you would plot it at the bottom of the grid. But then you need to look at the important for. So if it's really going to keep him safe, it'll be more to the left. And if it's not going to keep him safe, it would go to the right. So based on that, you look at, so where do we plot our options? So can I have an example of an option that a group came up with? Shutting down the highway. So that would keep him really safe. So then we would look at where would this fit, right? So does it, in this corner here, that option, would it fit there where he's safe and happy with the option? And he's, so it would go there. If he's safe but it's not, if he's unsafe but he's happy with the option, it would go in that corner. And then you grade it. So it takes a bit of conversation, and today we only have that half hour, so we don't have time for all those conversations. But you see how if you map it out, then what you would end up doing is those options that are all in here is what we would start with, because it does address the important to, important for, that balance. If the options fall under, yes, it's important to him, but he's really not safe with that option, then we'd look at how can we make it safer? Is there a way? And maybe there isn't, but we need to have that conversation. If it's at the bottom that he's not safe and it wouldn't make him happy, it doesn't connect with what's important to him, of course we're not going to go there, right? But maybe that was the first thing that came to mind. And at the bottom left would be the, yeah, he's safe, but he's really not unhappy. He's really unhappy. It's really not in line with what's important to him. So can we make it a little different so that he's happier, or it really matches what's important to him? Is there flexibility in that option to make it different so that it moves up to making him happy and connecting with what's important? In a nutshell, that's what it is. And then from there, you decide which options to try next. What you would do is you would capture it on this chart, where is the options. Will you try it? Yes, no, maybe. And then the reason. So the reason is the why you plotted it in that quadrant, right? So because it makes him unhappy, because it doesn't respect what's important to him, because he would be unsafe. What we're finding is that when teams use this, this is a really good way to capture why we decided to support the person in a certain way. Then we can go back. If the same thing or something similar comes up again, we can go back to our previous decision making to see how did we get there. So it doesn't take as much time next time, but we have that history. You guys sometimes in meetings where, oh, we've tried that 5 years ago, it didn't work. Or we always go back to the same conversations because we didn't capture it and we were reliant on whoever's in the room to remind us of what happened in that last conversation. This is one way to capture it. I'm getting a time's up, pretty much, right? Can I take 2 minutes, Mary Beth, from your time just to see if there are questions, because we won't get a chance to plot it at your tables with your groups, but Lori?
The one thing I'm struggling with, both in this example and in the Janice example, and we struggle with in life, is there are these regulatory issues that become important for when the reality of them is they're not really important for us. So how are some people dealing with that? What thoughts do you have on that?
I'm glad you asked that question because I think it goes back to what you said earlier on in terms of the group decides this, but the rules say that. I think part of it is understanding what's the best solution, and then it's the advocacy part, right? So rules are there and they're made, but they're not made not to be challenged, in my opinion. We need to speak up. We need to go and present proper information that says, listen, yeah, we say it's to keep him safe, but this is what we know about the history about him being safe with us. This is what we know, and if we do a good job capturing that, then it's a lot harder to say, well, it's the rule, right? Because then it's about him and his situation and his context and his, does that make sense? It doesn't mean the rule maker is going to change their mind, but there's more ability to challenge that and make it person-centered in terms of the decision. Eddie, there's someone at the back. Maybe that would be a good learning marketplace. I know folks want to talk about that.
Quite often when somebody says this is a rule, this is a regulation, and it's just enough of kicking this and say, show me, where is it written? Quite often we get caught up in a lot of urban legends. It's an ICS standard, it's yada, yada, yada. Show me where it's written, then we'll talk about it. And that's what we'll see if we can problem solve around it.
Yeah. Where's the rule? Let's read it. Let's look at it. What's the intent? I think the other piece is what's the intent? What does the rule really mean? Not just the words, but the intent in terms of how they created it, right? Because it might have a whole different intent than what we're reading into it. Absolutely. Thank you. One more? There you go.
Part of what you want to do is get people to practice this kind of thinking and do it repetitively, because in the real situation that we're talking about with Eugene, we're not going to be able to say, Eugene, could you do this ride next week because we have to schedule a meeting? It's immediate, and you are looking at, with Eugene, you're looking at 3 choices. You can either physically restrain him and destroy trust. You can tell him not to go and have him go anyway, angry and at greater risk. Or you can say, okay, and do a little negotiation about safety. Those are the 3 choices that you have. The issue that you're looking at is how do you get people to think about these items with enough frequency and enough depth that they're going to make decisions that are going to make sense for the people when they're confronted with the immediate question. Because many of these issues aren't things where you can say, we're putting your life on pause until we can schedule a meeting.
No, and that's not the intent of the presentation.
No, not at all.
No. As Mary Beth comes up and gets organized, Leanne's going to tell you how it turned out, right?
So, Michael's always so good at putting thoughts into words, and that was essentially what we did. we were on the phone with staff, and they're saying he's putting his helmet on, and he's going to be leaving. Not going to mom's wasn't an option. And we knew if we said, no, you can't, that he was going to say, screw you, in much greater language than that, and he was going to be gone. And Eugene's actually somebody who likes rules. He likes to know the expectations. So he does things like he walks his bike across busy intersections. If he'd been angry and pissed off, he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have worn his helmet. He wouldn't have ridden safely. So we just quickly sort of assessed the risk of saying no is way too great. The risk of saying, okay, tell us what time you're coming home, and he said, I'll be home by 3:30 because I got to take my meds at 4 o'clock. And he did. He called us when he got to his mom's house, came home exactly the time that he said he would. And I truly think, I joke about this, but I truly think we held our breath for the entire time. I just think we didn't care about the rule that said you don't have time, unsupervised time. I truly have to tell you, as the director of the agency, I don't even think that crossed my mind. What crossed my mind was, if I say no, he's gone, and he's going to get hit by a car. I can't say no, so what do I do? I don't think it ever occurred to me to even think about he doesn't have unsupervised time.